Yes, it's recording right now. And so Irving, whenever you're ready, you should be a co-host so you can share your screen. And then after we will have a Q&A if anybody has questions about what Irving is going to talk about.
Sounds good. All right. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So I'll enter presenter mode. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be reconnecting with UF. Obviously, it holds a special place in my heart, and especially coming to talk about my work and the work that we do at B-Lab, which it's obviously like something really exciting for me. If possible, and feel no pressure, I would love to see everyone's faces, or if people can go on video. I just find it like a little less or a little bit more engaging, so I know like who I'm talking to and like seeing reactions and so on. If you can't, I understand it's Friday at 3:30 p.m. That's totally fine. All right, so I wanted to start, and please, like as I go through this presentation, feel free to like ask questions and yeah, feel free to interrupt me. The idea is hopefully this is more of a conversation than me just like spitting content at you. So I usually like to start around just like situating us in the current context that we have. And I think this is even more relevant now, given everything that we're experiencing worldwide. But we can understand that, and we can realize that there's like a historic global culture shift that's happening pretty much in front of our eyes every day around how can businesses have both responsibility and an accountability to address some of society's greatest challenges towards a more inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system. So with that, through our network of partner organizations, and I'll explain a little bit more what that means, and the companies that we work with, we believe that we're uniquely positioned to accelerate this culture shift. And I say like we're positioned to accelerate it because we don't by no means are the only players in this space, but also like we hold a special, we hold like a unique community of companies that can like lead the way in a way that we think could be meaningful and lasting. So a little bit more about B-Lab, which is all the organizations and like the organizational network that is behind the B-Corp movement. So we are actually a collective of global organizations around the world that are all unified under the same mission and vision. And then we work with companies that are seeking to be leaders of this B-Corp, of this movement. And the idea is that through those companies, the certified B corporations, we can really redefine what success in business looks like, not only in terms of financial performance, but also as companies meet the highest standards of social and environmental performance, as well as public transparency and legal accountability. And I'll go into detail on what that means. And just to emphasize our collective vision for this network, it's one of an inclusive, equitable, and regenerative economic system that works for all people and the planet. So here's a little bit just like a quick overview of how we're structured across the globe. It's very, like we're in the middle of a global transition, so a lot of these governance structures are being put in place, but overall, this is how we are organized as a network. So when I refer to B-Lab or the B-Lab network or the B-Lab global network, I'm talking about this whole ecosystem of organizations that are like powering this work around the world. So what are we trying to do? And I think this is both exciting for me and it's what like keeps me going. We're not just trying to like work with businesses and we're not just trying to create a certification for the private sector. We're really trying to understand and try to push and accelerate a change into a new operating system, as we call it, for capitalism or for an economic system. And also like, please bear with me, some of this language, like we use it more for like US-centric audiences, but we also recognize that it goes differently across the world. But what this really means is that we have identified, like collectively as a society, that there is like a source code error in the current model as it stands. One that puts at the forefront what we call shareholder primacy, which means companies should only be working towards profit maximization in the short term. We know that that is not working. And we know that that has led us to some of the crises that we're seeing now, on top of like other systems like democracy, etc. So what we're trying to do is like understand that like that doesn't work, but what could work? And the idea is that we need to move or change this like operating system for capitalism from an idea of shareholder primacy to one of shared value, which is like this new operating system in which companies and the private sector in general move away from this idea of profit maximization for their shareholders and starts creating value for their stakeholders, which is more broadly than just like the people who own the capital. So the way that we understand and like go about our work, it's obviously number one and like center to this work, it's building that community of credible leaders, which are the big corporations. So these companies are like the model that like other players in the sector can actually look into or look towards and understand that there's a way and a tangible way to do things differently. So these are companies that are meeting the highest standards around social and environmental performance. These are also companies that are changing and creating a structural, changing their structural governance and how they operate to actually reflect this idea of stakeholder engagement, and also and are like coming up with transparency around their operations. Then the next step, it's around how do we then use that community of credible leaders to empower or help others to follow. We understand that like in reality, like we will never get every single businesses that exist to be a big corporation. And that's part of the intention. Like the standard was created in a way that it's like really for only those that are like at the top of the, like leading that way. But that doesn't mean that others cannot aspire to be that like that or start managing and measuring their impact. And then like a third step, it's around like, how do we also like go beyond just like companies and also understand that there's consumers, workers, investors that are also part of this ecosystem, and how do we inspire them to also become part of this movement and taking action in the decisions that they have, whether it's as a consumer, the products or services that you purchase, whether as an investor is the type of companies that you invest in, as a worker, the type of companies that you go work with, etc. And I wanted to kind of like use also like a framing of how we understand this in terms of systemic change, because I think that's critical for us. So we understand that we have to influence three types of changes for this to be actually systemic. Number one is behavioral. And the way that we do that, or like the primary audience for us to do that, it's around companies. We believe that if we give companies the tools for them to change their behavior, they can be catalytic to for like other players in the ecosystem. And we chose the company, a company, or like to work with companies because they touch many stakeholders. They touch workers, they touch consumers, they touch investors, they touch the public in general, they touch governments, etc. So like if companies start changing their behavior, they can also influence the other players that they engage with. Another type of change that we try to promote is a cultural shift. So as I mentioned, this is way beyond just the private sector, but more so about the public in general to also be part and understand what's their role in this. And then lastly, it's also about a structural shift. We recognize that it's not enough for companies to change the way like that they measure their performance, but if there's no systemic or structural changes into what a business is supposed to do, there's little change that can happen at a systemic level. So I'll dive a little deeper into each of these like 3 areas of our work. So the number one, it's around, as I mentioned, building a community of leaders, which are the certified B corporations. So as I said, these are companies that are meeting the highest standards. As of today, we have around 3,300, a little bit more than that, certified B Corps around the world, about 75 countries from 150 industries, and all of them like seeking the same goal. This is just a snapshot of some of the companies that are in our community. Obviously, there's way more than these, but hopefully you can identify some of these organizations from your day-to-day. And something that I wanted to emphasize is that this is actually a global community. We were founded in the US. We have been US led for, we're about like 13, 14 years old. We have been US led for most of that time. And we're in a process in which we're trying to transition towards a more global organization to respond to actually the reality of our community and really the reality of our movement in which we always wanted to create. So as of today, about 65% of the total community is outside the US. And more, we're working with companies that are also more global by nature. The second piece around creating ways for other companies and the private sector more in general to engage, which comes back to this idea of structural shift. It's our work around impact governance. So we recognize that, for example, in the US, by law, companies are required to maximize profit for their shareholders. So we understood that it wasn't enough to just create standards for performance for companies on how they could do better, but like if by law or like if by like structurally, there wasn't also a change to allow for companies to actually put in like before the interest of their shareholders and try to put something around the environment or their workers, little change would be able to happen. So part of this work is we promote different legal structures, or we also like analyze like different legal structures that from countries around the world to be able to promote and allow businesses to align that their interests as a business are aligned with those of society. So as of today, we have passed about 36 laws in the US. This has been like a state-by-state approach. So about 36 states across the United States have what we call benefit corporation legislation passed, which allow companies to legally embed this idea of stakeholder capitalism into their bylaws. And then we also have been working in other countries to pass similar laws. So as of now, Italy has this law as a whole country, Colombia, Ecuador, and we're working in about like 13 or 15 other countries to pass similar laws. And just to kind of like put this in context of what we're seeing now is that like this has been going for the last like 5 to 8 years, but recently, like with the current COVID crisis and more the social unrest that we're seeing across the globe, from Hong Kong to Lebanon, to Chile, to the United States, we're seeing that there's this appetite for a different economic system, that the current one is not working, and that there needs to be something else that helps us towards a more sustainable economic system. So I just wanted to showcase a little bit of like some of the headlines that we're seeing across the globe around like how like capitalism is in crisis as we understand it, and how we need a different system. We need a better system that responds to that, as well as some of the engagement that we've had of how like our model is trying to address some of those challenges. And then the second piece around that, it's also impact management. So when it comes to performance, we create tools for companies to be able to measure and manage their impact. So that's primarily through our main tool, which is the B-Impact assessment. this is our set of standards that like companies anywhere in the world can access. It's a free tool. We see it as a public service that they can just log in, create an account, and see how they can improve and manage their social and environmental impact. As of this year, we also launched in collaboration, in partnership with the United Nations Global Compact, a tool for companies to also be able to measure their impact towards the progress of the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. And similar, this is housed in the B-Impact assessment. It's part of that same platform, or like impact platform. But the idea is like to really give businesses like tangible tools that they can use to better understand their impact that they're having. So there's that. We have other initiatives around this, like recognizing some of the best for the world companies. This is for certified B corporations that are ranking in the top, I believe, 10% of the community in terms of like the impact that they're having in the different areas that we evaluate as part of the assessment. So this is workers, customers, community, governance, and environment. And then we have two specific categories around the overall impact for those companies that are making progress across all those 5 areas, and also for what we call change makers that have like the most rapid improvement, comparatively speaking, across the community. And then we also have different programs or initiatives that try to really embed and promote businesses using these tools for their own impact measurement and management. So I think the most exciting or inspiring example is at a country level basis is what our UK team is doing with Scotland, where they are rolling out a countrywide initiative that includes private sector engagement, and they're using our tools for businesses across the country to really understand what their impact is, and then reporting back to this like centralized countrywide initiative. And then lastly, we have the idea of collective voice, or like cultural change. It's also like, how do we inspire millions of consumers, workers, investors, policymakers, students, just like public in general, to be more engaged and to really understand like why this is about systems change and what's the role of businesses in this ecosystem towards like that different economic system that we're trying to create. Just to give you a couple examples, this is some of the brand campaigns that our teams here in the US and Canada have developed to really try to engage the general public around the work that B Corps are doing, and the work that like companies in general can do, and how they can also like, the idea is that how can consumers really understand that they can vote every day with their dollar by thinking of the purchases they make every day. And then there's also like other types of coalitions or initiatives that we are part of, obviously recognizing that we're not the only player in this system, and that we are stronger when we partner with other aligned organizations that are trying to drive this change. So this is one of the most relevant examples, which is Imperative 21. B-Lab is one of the founding like organizations for this initiative, which is like ambitious and like trying to like really drive that part of systemic change around a structural shift, specifically in the US, but also like at a global level. So what would it take for like companies, and we're talking about like larger companies, multinationals, publicly traded companies, for them to also start this journey towards like really changing how their organizations are structured, to have a different look into what impact they can have. And these are some of the partnerships that some of the organizations that are part of this coalition. Yeah. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or comments. I'm happy to open it up. I think the next part of my presentation was intended to go a little bit deeper into what the B-Impact assessment is, how it works. But before we move into that, I'm happy to answer any questions or comments that you all may have.
Thank you very much, Irving. That was very, very, very good, very interesting. And thank you for doing it for us. I'm absolutely impressed with the way you spoke, with the quality of the slides. I mean, well done. Um, I, I, I have quite a few questions for you. And one of the questions I have is, are you, and are you saying that Italy is one of the most advanced countries from this point of view because they have the B Corporation woven into their legislation?
Yep. So Italy was the first country outside the United States that was able to pass this legislation at a countrywide level.
And how many years ago do you remember? Can you find out, like more or less?
I want to say maybe like 5 years ago. No, like four or 5 years ago.
So maybe I was in Parliament. That's why I'm asking. I was a member of the Italian Parliament, and so maybe I was involved in passing that law, but I can't remember.
Maybe.
So if it was between 2013 and 2016, I was in Parliament.
It could have been. It's called Società Benefit. Maybe I don't know. Like if
it's called
Società Benefit. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly.
Società Beneficio Pubblico. Come are they called? I don't know. I'll have to look it up. It's interesting.
Yep.
Thank you. But this is also very, very, I mean, fortunate, I would say. We are working with, we have this interdisciplinary initiative, which is built around trying to look at COVID from different angles, right? And so, of course, Italy was one of the countries that was most affected. We are working with many Italian and European universities. And of course, we would welcome, and we will welcome, some, let's say, entrepreneurial partners or business partners in this effort, which is, you know, very, I would say, it's explorative, because we are trying to combine groups that would normally not work together, and we are trying to get them to answer questions which are, let's say, multifaceted. And of course, we have some ideas of developing, you know, some products that could go onto market, and of course, identifying the company. I mean, Luca, I'm just thinking out loud, but as we look at Yellow Submarine developing, we would engage, I mean, this is my idea, and I may be saying something completely stupid here, but we would preferentially engage with the companies. I mean, is this like, is this something that you can ask for? I mean, do you have like a commercial advantage on other companies or not?
I would say yes, in terms of, obviously, the B Corp community would likely be more attuned and more aligned with some of the objectives that we're trying to see. And also, like, this idea of multidisciplinarity, I think like it's pretty much embedded in part of the assessment itself, of like really understanding that a company has an impact way beyond its own operations. Like, it goes into their workers, it goes into the communities where they operate, and even like in the way that they are structured and like governed, that can have an impact beyond just their company, but like really into the broader system. So the idea is that even for when we talk about like benefit corporation, a lot of the effort to actually like advocate for that was also coming from the companies themselves. So like, obviously, like when a community of companies come in front of like, you know, like different politicians or like parties, etc., there's a different message around that. So and these communities are already kind of like connected and engaged. So I think there's definitely like even if nothing else, an opportunity to put something in front of them to say, this is something that we could explore, and then see how they react to that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, are there, I know that Rio had a question, which is very similar to a question that I wanted to ask. It's on the chat. How does B Corporation certification fit and relate with other types of certifications?
Mm-hmm. So we, I think one of the factors that makes us unique is that we look into a company as a whole. So we don't just look into like a specific product or service that the company might be producing, like that's part of the assessment, but we really look into like how the company operates across like these 5 impact areas. That said, we also rely on other certifications to like prove or provide like proof of impact. So for example, when companies have some of their products, and we're looking into those that are already either certified as either USDA organic or like when their operations are like LEED certified, etc. Like we will take those into account as proof of like the impact that they're already having. So like we actually compile different different certifications that are already in existence to use those, so like companies don't need to like prove again to us that like their products are organic, for example. So a way that like we try to compare this is like we are what like USDA organic or bio for in Europe for milk. That's what we are for companies. So it's not just the products or services, it's like the whole operation. So like a company, and the idea is that there can be companies that can have like really strong and positive environmental practices, but can have very questionable like social practices with their workers, for example. So the idea is that we're trying to assess how a company overall does, as opposed to just a specific part of those operations.
I see that we have Pam Saltis connected. Thank you, Pam, for being here. Are there any questions from anybody else? And so who funds you? Who funds this whole, because it is quite clear that, I mean, okay, you never know what Homo sapiens and what people are going to do now. I really don't know. I'm surprised every day by what I hear in the news. But like, it's clear that this is the way forward, right? Like, there already is a system that can counteract some of the fragilities that we have seen exposed through COVID. And so basically, you know, between the Sustainable Development Goals and B Corporation and big data, I mean, I think that there is really some hope for the future. And so I wonder, who is keeping you going? Is it the single companies that fund you, or do you have, I mean, how does that part work?
So we have a blended model in which obviously we generate revenue through the certification fees that come from companies. We also have other products and programs that are priced to our partners. So for example, there's like a package that like our partners might be able to promote, for example, with Scotland, of like, this is like how we can like help you understand the data, and like there are some licensing agreements with that. And then there's also philanthropic support. So as of today, B-Lab, kind of like the centralized primarily US based operation, it's at about like 65%, no, like 55% funded by our own revenue, and the remaining 45% funded by philanthropy. They're like, obviously philanthropy, it's a little bit trickier, like based on like funder preferences. But some of the core parts of our work that gets a lot of philanthropic support is, for example, the development of standards. And that could be either for a new version of the B-Impact assessment, which changes every 3 years, to the development of the SDG Action Manager, for example, that had a heavy philanthropic support. And then we also have like other pieces of our work that attract interest from partners that can be more region specific. So for example, in the US, that there's a lot of like interest around like inclusive economies or like the future of work. And so like this idea might be more specific for the US. US centric funders also are interested in like funding either like programs or platforms that try to tackle that. Yeah. Perfect. So if it's okay, if there's no more questions, I can go into just like the standards and how they work.
There is a question here, Bing, sorry, from Olga in the chat.
Okay. During the pandemic, sick leave, work from home flexibility, and that is really good. Thanks for the question, Olga. I think, to be honest, I'm not sure. I know there has been different companies in the community that have put forward different initiatives, or like even like, I think like part of the benefit of this community is precisely that it's actually a community of companies. And despite like some of them being like in the same industry or actually being competitors, they collaborate very closely. So I know there has been companies throughout the world who have been able to like kind of like provide with different toolkits of what they have been doing for other companies to do that. I don't know on top of my head like a more broad or like a specific assessment of like how the companies overall are doing in terms of in relation to COVID. I know we also have some preliminary data that B Corps by nature were already like or already had in place some of these practices, because it's part of like the questions that we have on the assessment. So some of them already had like really like above and beyond like sick leave policies. Some of them already have working from home flexibility or arrangements. But I think like a more like structured assessment of like how things were before and after hasn't been developed yet, or at least I'm not aware of it yet. Great. So, as I was mentioning, the BIA or the B-Impact assessment, it's a free tool. It's also confidential. So like all the data that we collect from companies, it's secured. And the idea is that it is a way for them to measure and manage their social and environmental impact. But we don't see it just as a measurement tool, but also like as a learning one. So as companies go through the questions, the idea is for number one, like for them to be really challenging, so that like they really can become the better version of companies that they have. And as part of that process, we also create and provide different tools and resources for them to actually achieve some of those practices. So the idea is that obviously it works around these 5 impact areas that I mentioned. And then we also are able to aggregate this data and compare to see how they benchmark against other businesses in their industry, against like businesses overall. And obviously, as I said, they can also create plans for improvement, which is like at the end of the day, our ultimate goal is that even if a company is not interested in certification, can they engage with our tool and use our tool to make improvement in their operations? So we think like even if a company changes like 1 or 2, 3 areas that they choose to do so, it's already an improvement that what had happened if they had never engaged with in impact management. So just to give you like a quick overview of how the BI is structured, obviously there's like 5 core like impact areas: governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. And then they dive into kind of like 2 parts of the two specific structures. One of them is operational and one of them looks into their impact business model. So the idea is that this is not just for social enterprises or for companies that already have like some of this idea of like social or environmental responsibility as part of their model. The idea is that this tool should be able to be used by any company, regardless of their industry, what they do, how they do it, etc. If we want to change like the way the private sector and like the economic system works, every company needs to be able to understand their impact. And that's what this is aimed to do. So, so what you see in gray, it's all related to that like operational part, which is like the day-to-day of how a company operates across these 5 areas. And then the ones in color are what we call like impact business model. And the idea is that some companies obviously will have like by the way they operate, by the way the products they produce or the services they offer, it's already targeted at some positive impact, either socially or environmentally. And the idea is like for us to actually like take a look into that and see what the impact that they're having. So when it comes to certification, any company can become a certified B Corp, regardless if they're like a social enterprise or not. Social enterprises, obviously, because they have access or they have like this impact business model, have better chances of gaining more points and therefore being more likely or quote unquote more easy to achieve the certification. But that doesn't prevent a company that doesn't have an impact business model to achieve that. So for example, there's a company in Indonesia that creates sandals out of upcycled materials like tires. So obviously, like by the way they operate, they're trying to solve an environmental issue, which is around like waste or resource reduction. And at the same time, like they do so with different communities, with different local communities as a way to create a different economic development mechanism there. So obviously like that company has access to like the different questions around their operations, but also around those specific impact business models. They're certified. And then there's other company like Ben and Jerry's, for example, that they produce ice cream. And as much as I love ice cream, like that doesn't by itself is changing anything environmentally or socially. However, in the way that they produce that ice cream, like through their suppliers, in the way that like they resource different materials, they also can have a positive impact, or like they have an impact and they can like change that towards a more positive outcome. So by the way of looking at their operations, they're also able to certify. And Ben & Jerry's, like the US subsidiary, it's a certified B Corp. So just a way for me to say like, it is something that it's developed for all companies. Obviously, like social and environmentally focused ones are more likely to obtain the certification, but it doesn't prevent other companies from either using our tools or also eventually gaining certification if they choose to like really improve across their operations. And what I was saying is that the main goal of the B impact assessment is that like as companies go through it, that they can take steps towards measurable change. So here are just like some examples of like what some companies have done as part of going through the assessment, regardless of their certification intent. And just quickly, like what does it take for a company to certify? Obviously, they need to meet the performance requirement, which is going through the B impact assessment and then go through a review process of that, where our teams as a third-party verifier can go and review that they effectively are meeting at least 80 points out of a total of 200. That's the minimum that a company needs to achieve for them to be able to certify. Now, I know that 80 out of 200 seems pretty low, But to give you an idea, like our average business, like regular business, it scores around like 40 to 50 points. So for a company to actually achieve 80 points, they really need to put in practice different improvement mechanisms and like really look into either their operations or their impact business model. They also need to meet the legal requirement. As I mentioned, we believe that for this to be systemic, it also needs to look at like kind of like the rules of the game. So in those countries where we have either established or passed benefit corporation or similar laws, they need to change the way they're legally registered. And in some other countries, the existing laws allow for this like a stakeholder idea, but they still need to make some changes to their bylaws. So whatever the pathway that is, that's also part of the requirement for certification. And then obviously like they need to pay their certification fees. They sign the Declaration of Interdependence, which is like kind of like the values that as a community we obey by. And also like they make their performance transparent to the general public. So if you go to our website, bcorporation.net, you can find a directory of all the B corporations around the world and see how they're scoring on each of those 5 areas. If there's some like cases or like controversial issues that they might be involved with. There's also like some requirements around disclosure around those and the remediation that they have been put in place and so on. So the idea is that not only they need to meet a performance requirement, a legal requirement, but also have to be transparent about their scores. So I want to stop there and see if there are any questions on the process, on the BIA as such, or any comments of this new section of the content. Good.
I think we can move on if you have another
Perfect.
you have another part. So I would go on and then maybe wrap it up when you're done.
Okay, sounds good. So I just wanted to just to showcase a little bit of the of like why companies certify. In this case, Athleta, for example, as a very like well-known like public brand, which is also like part of the Gap group. Like what they were looking was to really like part of the incentive for them to pursue certification was around having an objective third-party validation. So more and more companies, and this is what they were saying, is like we needed not only to say that we were doing things and like that we were doing things differently, but we needed to actually like verify that that was happening. And Athleta, like any other like larger companies, usually have to go through a very robust improvement process for them to actually achieve the certification, and for them to be able to go through that process and like really take a deeper look into their operations was what incentivized them to pursue certification. In some others, we're seeing that there's some competitive advantage for these type of companies. We've seen that about 90%, about from the like we conducted different like brand value studies, and we saw that like companies like saw a better performance around their branding, and also like some B Corps were growing faster than non-B Corps, like comparative in the same industry or in the same sector. And I think this is one of my favorite. We oftentimes try to like see how B Corps compare and like, or like what's their performance against competitors in terms of consumer attraction. But something really interesting that we found is that a more internal stakeholder view of this has proven to be also a competitive advantage. So B Corps have seen that like they are attracting better talent than non-B Corps. And while this wasn't like initially kind of like something that they were looking towards, they've seen that this is actually like a very competitive advantage for them to be able to attract the top talent. and also like retain it. And then I also wanted to, just to close, we also recognize that like as of like 5 years ago, this was a primarily like small and medium enterprise movement. And in the last 5 years or so, we've seen like a really interesting uptake and interest from multinationals or public companies. So as of today, the companies on the left are public companies that have certified. I believe they're in terms of size. And then to the right, we also have like some multinationals that have certified a subsidiary or more. So you can see hopefully like really like obviously like for Unilever or Procter & Gamble, like some of these like big multinationals, like we know that certification might be like even outside of their reach because of just the way they operate. But yet we've created pathways for like a specific wholly owned subsidiaries to be able to go through that process. And I think like maybe if you're like aware of some of the work we do, one of the most like vocal advocate and one of the companies that is doing the most work around this, it's Danone. And you can see like they're going through, they have a goal of achieving B Corp certification by 2030. So they have been really aggressive at like making improvement on each of these subsidiaries for them to eventually be able to obtain certification as a group. And this is just like some of like the headlines, as I was saying, from like Athleta and the Gap Group, Danone, some of the ripples that these big companies are having by changing their practices. So that's all I had for today. I'm happy to answer any more questions, either related to the content. If you have questions around something else or comments, I'm also happy to go through those.
Thank you very, very much, Irving. It was very interesting and very well presented. So thank you. So I have a question for you. So what you're seeing is that like big corporations, what they do is they will certify, one subsidiary. That's how they're putting their feet in the water. Does this make sense? So, because of course companies need to make it economically sustainable or it's not going to fly. And so what I see from your slide is that big companies, they will sort of certify one small part and then they see if it's sustainable. And then like Danone has instead decided to expand it aggressively, as you said. So how long does it take? How long do you think it will take to get from the experimental phase to the aggressive phase?
I think something important to mention is that even within that model, like a subsidiary cannot certify alone. So for a subsidiary to be able to certify, we have requirements that trigger that they have to make, the parent company needs to make progress towards certification at the parent level. So our certification cycles work in 3 years, every 3 years. So if like in those 3 years, let's say Athleta, that's certified, if in those 3 years we don't see material progress from the Gap Group, which is the parent company, Athleta would lose their certification. So the idea is like for us to like, we're creating these pathways for companies to engage with the tool, but it's not about, sorry, it's not about like, oh, like I just certify a subsidiary, I feel great about it, and then like I don't have to do any meaningful improvement in my overall group. The idea by like having this as part of the requirement is that like, yes, you can certify a subsidiary, but you also need to make tangible progress for the group to eventually become certified. Otherwise, we will take away that from that subsidiary. In terms of timing, it depends. I think some companies, depending on kind of like the buy-in that they have and some of the legal requirements that they will need to go through, it might take them longer, especially when they need, for example, the known in the US, for them to become certified, they needed to change their legal structure to become a benefit corporation. They had an incredible opportunity when they acquired couple operations and so on. So they had the opportunity to like restructure that group and those operations and do it as a benefit corporation. In some cases that might take longer because of like the board approval processes that takes. I think as we look into these larger multinationals, I think the cynical part of me would say like, we are like years away from like a Unilever or a Procter & Gamble to like really be able to meet the performance requirements. That's the cynical part of me. The more hopeful part of me, it's also seeing that they're actually putting in place different improvement practices to do so. So I don't know if I have like a clear idea of like how long will it take for these companies to go through the process. I think part of it is also like how long they can keep engagement going and like survive like changes in leadership and so on. But I think more and more with this like broader cultural shift that we're seeing is that like companies are increasingly recognizing that they are more and more accountable to like the public and to different stakeholders. So even if it's like coming from like a moral place of like, this is the right thing to do, or for like external motivators, I think like they're still under enough pressure that like keeps them going into that pathway that hopefully, maybe, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, they'll be able to achieve that.
I certainly think that COVID will accelerate this, because it's clear that, you know, certain pathways are obsolete and we just need to let them go because they just don't work anymore. There's a question from Pam Soltis. Pam, would you like to take the floor?
Okay, sure. So Irving, thank you so much for your talk. And it was really great to learn about this. I went to the website a little bit before your presentation to learn a little bit more because I wasn't really familiar with this. So it's great to be able to learn more about it. So I'm from the UF Biodiversity Institute and the Florida Museum of Natural History. And so I'm particularly interested in some of the environmental and biodiversity related climate change, et cetera, sorts of problems. And so, so looking at how those sorts of certifications or those elements would be possible that was particularly interesting. But I was wondering if there are things like biomedical or genetics or pharmaceutical companies that have that are at all interested in certification, if there are some that are in the list, or just how you might be able to comment on things that really sort of relate to, you know, a comprehensive, better sort of One Health perspective on things. I'll shut up and let you talk.
Absolutely. I think there is, I know there are a few pharmaceutical companies that have achieved certification. I believe Hovion, based out of Portugal, is one of the larger ones. And I know there's also like some interest, especially like after COVID, from some other companies to go through that as a way to like really evaluate and take a look into their impact. I think like I'm not sure about the larger firms, but there's definitely some companies in those industries that are part of the community.
Great, thank you.
And just to add to that, like if you go to our website, there's a directory, and you can take a look at companies by like industry, country, and you will see like a full list of all the companies that are certified, as well as like, as I mentioned, like their scores in the different impact in the different impact areas.
Great, thank you very much.
Good. So are there any other questions for Irving? Well, look, I really want to thank you. This was absolutely enlightening for me. And actually, I do give lectures. So today I was invited to give a lecture at a forum of the European Green Party. And so because of my former engagement with policymaking, I am in several settings that are quite unique for a scientist, and so I will certainly. So our center is very focused on sustainability, and we developed the circular health program that now Luca is in charge of, and it has many ramifications. We're working around COVID, but we are working around substantially, new approaches to address wicked problems, and certainly bringing into the discussion how we can at least facilitate the collaboration with certain types of corporation, and also, start a change movement. So, for example, one of the, well, I don't need to tell you, but the fashion industry is a disaster for a series of reasons, especially for environmental and issues and for equality. And but I see that the new post-COVID world is more open to fixing some of those issues, and I see, and that even chief executives of big fashion companies are transitioning towards a more sustainable approach. And so I think that, you can have the best idea in the world, but if the time isn't right, it's not going to fly. And I think that COVID-19 has brought disgrace and despair, and has stolen many lives, and is still stealing many lives. And it will certainly leave behind itself a lot of ugly things. But I think that, we can either go back to where we were, or try and use what we have to go somewhere else. And I think that this was extremely useful to us, and I'm sure to the people who are not part of the center, who are also connected. And I would like to thank you. Thank Luca and Lacey for organizing this. Luca, would you like to say a few words to close?
Thank you, Larry. I think you said most of it, or all of it. Thank you very much, Irving. Yeah, I really hope that this could be a start for us to think about how to get private companies involved in this concept of circular health. And we hope to be able to get in touch with you again and nurture this potential relationship. Thank you very much again, Irving, for...
And I would like to add that Luca is an economist. And so let's say that Luca has just self-imposed on himself responsibility. He's doing job security, right? Luca, you're creating your job for the future. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It was nice to see you. I hope that you are all well and safe. And yeah, let's keep smiling regardless of the hard times. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to